A manila folder. Inside, names typed on a page, dates, black and white photographs, an address in Buenos Aires, another in Montevideo, a third in Rome. In the upper corner, a stamp in red ink, confidential. That folder did not travel through diplomatic mail or official channels. It moved hand to hand between intelligence agents who answered to no judge, no parliament, no citizen. And the person named inside that folder believed they were safe. They had crossed a border. They had left their country, their language, their political life behind. They thought distance was a form of protection. It was not. South America in the 1970s was not simply a region going through political upheaval. It was a continent where several forces were operating at the same time, each reinforcing the others. The Cold War was not some distant affair playing out between Washington and Moscow. It was a doctrine that had seeped into Latin American armies, military academies, intelligence services, and the very language states used to describe their own citizens. The so-called national security doctrine divided the world into friends and enemies of order. Communism was the enemy. And enemy could mean anyone: a union organizer, a liberation theology priest, a college student, a journalist, a left-wing activist, a political exile, or simply someone who knew someone considered suspicious. Between 1964 and 1976, a series of military coups reshaped the Southern Cone. Brazil fell first in 1964. Bolivia followed in 1971, Uruguay in 1973, Chile in September of that same year, Argentina in 1976. Paraguay had already been living under Alfredo Stroessner since 1954. The result was that within just a few years, the subcontinent was almost entirely controlled by military regimes that shared a common vision of the internal enemy and a common suspicion of political dissent. It did not take long for them to realize they also shared the same adversaries. The problem was that those adversaries moved. Exiles crossed borders. Militants fleeing Chile arrived in Argentina. Those fleeing Argentina moved on to Uruguay or Brazil. Some made it to Europe, to Mexico, to Venezuela. Political persecution had national limits. Resistance did not, always. And for the intelligence services of these dictatorships, that was a problem that needed a coordinated solution. In November 1975 in Santiago, Chile, a meeting took place that formalized something that had already been happening informally. Representatives from the intelligence services of Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil came together to design a structure for shared repression. They called it Operation Condor. The meeting was convened by DINA, Chile's Directorate of National Intelligence, the secret police created and led by Manuel Contreras under direct orders from Augusto Pinochet. Contreras was not just an executor. He was the operational architect of a network that turned political persecution into a regional project, complete with its own procedures, communications, and filing systems. What was designed at that meeting went far beyond a simple intelligence sharing agreement, though it was that too. It was a three-phase structure. In the first phase, countries exchanged data, lists of individuals, photographs, political affiliations, movements, contacts, home addresses. In the second, the services of one country could operate inside another's territory to surveil, capture, or disappear people without any legal process or public notice. In the third phase, the one with the widest geographic reach, operations could extend to Europe and other parts of the world where Latin American exiles had settled. The bureaucracy of terror has something deeply unsettling about it when you examine it up close. Its administrative ordinariness. The documents of Operation Condor do not look like records of crimes. They look like office paperwork, memos with subjects and recipients, personal files organized alphabetically, encrypted communications between state agencies, requests for information signed by section chiefs, acknowledgments of receipt, classified archives, the same bureaucratic language used to process pensions or land registries was used to coordinate kidnappings, clandestine transfers, interrogations, and disappearances. That ordinariness does not reduce the horror. It makes it harder to understand and harder to interrupt, because it becomes invisible inside the everyday functioning of the state. Buenos Aires was, during the years of the coordination, one of the network's central hubs. The city sheltered thousands of exiles from across the region, Chileans who had fled after the 1973 coup, Uruguayans escaping repression at home, Paraguayans who had been living in exile for decades. When the Argentine military junta seized power in 1976, what had been a place of refuge became an operational theater. Argentine intelligence services coordinated with those of neighboring countries to identify, surveil, and capture people who had crossed the border believing they were out of reach. Some were returned to their home countries on clandestine flights. Many disappeared without leaving any official trace. Their families received no notifications. There were no charges, no trials, no sentences, only silence. The network's reach was demonstrated even before the Santiago meeting gave it a formal structure. In September 1974, General Carlos Prats, the former commander-in-chief of the Chilean army and a central figure during Salvador Allende's government, was assassinated in Buenos Aires, along with his wife, Sofia Cuthbert. A bomb had been placed in their car. Prats was living in exile in Argentina and represented, for Pinochet, an uncomfortable witness and a potential critical voice. His murder, carried out by DINA agents on Argentine soil, made clear that political repression no longer recognized national borders. 2 years later, in September 1976, the operation reached Washington. Orlando Letelier, a former minister in Allende's government and one of the most visible opponents of the Chilean dictatorship abroad, was assassinated on Embassy Row, just steps from international embassies and institutions. The explosion also killed his colleague, Ronnie Carpen Moffitt, an American citizen. That a foreign state agent had carried out a political assassination in the heart of the U.S. Capitol was without precedent. Subsequent investigations established the direct responsibility of Dina and Manuel Contreras. The Letelier case became one of the most thoroughly documented pieces of evidence of Operation Condor's international scope. The question of what the United States knew and how it positioned itself toward these networks remains one of the most debated of that era. American foreign policy in the 1970s, under Henry Kissinger, openly prioritized anti-communist stability over any concern for human rights. Declassified documents show that U.S. officials were aware of the coordinated repressive structure. In some cases, they warned the governments involved about actions that might attract too much international attention. The exact degree of active involvement versus passive tolerance is still being investigated and debated. But what the archives do not support is the idea that Washington had no idea what was happening. Those archives are central to this story. For decades, the existence of Operation Condor as a formal network was denied or minimized by the governments involved. Evidence existed in fragments, survivor testimonies, investigative journalism, scattered documents. Then, in December 1992, a Paraguayan judge named José Agustín Fernández discovered something unexpected inside a police building on the outskirts of Asunción. Tons of documents. Personal files, photographs, correspondence between intelligence services from multiple countries, detention records, surveillance reports on exiles in Europe and Latin America. They became known as the Archives of Terror. They contained information on nearly 50,000 individuals from across the region. These were not rumors or later reconstructions. They were the system's own records, preserved with the same bureaucratic precision with which they had been created. Those documents opened judicial proceedings in several countries. Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and others launched investigations and prosecuted those responsible. Some of the network's key operators, including Manuel Contreras, were convicted. The sentences came too late for many families, and in several cases the accused died before proceedings concluded. But the principle that these crimes could be tried, even decades later, shifted something fundamental in the continent's legal landscape. What remains when the case files are closed is not simply a chapter of history. It is the image of a system deliberately constructed to leave no visible traces, and that left them anyway, because bureaucracy cannot function without keeping records. The names in those cardboard folders belonged to people who had crossed borders looking for distance, anonymity, time. The network followed them. It did not always reach them, but the fear that it might was itself a form of control that extended far beyond those directly targeted. Operation Condor was not an isolated episode or an anomaly within the Latin American history of that period. It was the most organized expression of something the region's military regimes had decided together: that no border should protect those who had been classified as enemies, that the state could use silence as policy, the archive as a weapon, and bureaucracy as a cloak of invisibility. Some of those archives are open today. Some names have been recovered. Some sentences have been handed down. And still, there are families searching for answers that the documents do not fully provide, because what an archive can return is the trail of what happened. What it cannot return is the people.